Well, hello and Happy New Year. It is January 1st here at Newtown Congregational Church for our online worship. The beginning of a new year, and we're going to talk about beginnings today. We're glad you're with us now as we enter into this season of Christmastide and heading towards the season of Epiphany, the season of light, and we're going to talk about beginnings and light and all kinds of stuff today. But we're glad you're with us for our online worship. I have a couple of announcements for you, and then we'll move on into some time of worship. The first is that next Sunday, January 8th, we're going to be having a special gathering, both in worship as well as after worship, where we're going to be welcoming Bishop Jim Curry, the retired bishop of the Connecticut Episcopal Diocese. And he also now is involved and works with Swords into Plowshares Northeast, which is a program that takes guns and turns them into garden tools. In keeping with the imagery we receive from the prophet Isaiah, that they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Yeah, I'll get it right. And so Jim's going to talk about this program with us in worship, and then he actually is going to have his forge with him, and we'll have the opportunity to be with Jim, and those that want to can be out there seeing how he takes different parts from guns that have been turned into police stations. The Swords and the Plowshares Northeast works with a number of police departments throughout the Northeast who have gun buyback programs and get guns in other kinds of ways that end up, and the idea is to convert them, parts of them, into garden tools, and then those garden tools are used and given to community gardens in the very communities where the guns come from, as a sign and symbol of the transformative prayer that we all have to make our communities safer and to experience the vision of Isaiah, the vision that fear and violence are no more, and that we are communities where the instruments we use are instruments of that cultivate and nourish us by growing food and by cultivating and nourishing our lives, our spirits as well. So we'll hear more about that next week. I hope you'll join us. There will be a special simple luncheon afterwards of soups and breads. So if you come and join us for worship, don't worry, you'll get a little chance to have some food, and then you can check out the rest of the information we have and the program that'll be taking place next week. There are other announcements happening. We are, as we said, in the new year, and a lot of things are going to be going on in the coming weeks. So do look for your emails that give you information, or let us know if for some reason you're not receiving your emails. Let the church office know. We'll make sure we get the right email address for you. But with that, let us continue now with our time of worship.
She sang a love song, Mary. She sang a love song, and Mary, she sang a love song. She sang a love song to her baby. Lamplight on the stable walls, shadows in the cattle stalls, a song of love on a mama's words. She sings a song which first she heard. Mary, she sang a love song. Mary, she sang a love song. And Mary, she sang a love song. She sang a love song to her baby. 12 years old and now a man, sing from the caravan. Back they go in fear and haste, find him in the holy place. Son, how could you do this thing? Mama, you taught me to sing. he sang a love song. Jesus, he sang a love song. And Jesus, he sang a love song. He sang a love song to his mama. 30 years and by the shore, tell me what you're fishing for. Leave your nets and come along, and I'll teach you my fishing song. Jesus, he sang a love song. Jesus, he sang a love song. And Jesus, he sang a love song. He sang a love song to the fishermen. 33 and through the pain, Jesus sang it once again. Stark against a falling sky, a song went up on a single cry. Jesus, he sang a love song. Jesus, he sang a love song. And Jesus, he sang a love song. He sang a love song to everybody. Lamplight on the stable walls, shadows in the cattle stalls, a song of love on a mama's words. She sings a song which first she heard. Mary, she sang a love song. Mary, she sang a love song. And Mary, she sang a love song. She sang a love song to her baby.
As we enter into our message for today, I want to remind you that we are going to be sharing in communion online today. So you want to make sure you have something to drink and something to eat that can serve as your bread and your cup for our time of communion. We believe in the connection we can make, even if it's online like this, the power of connection through sharing of communion. So we hope you'll be ready when the time comes, and don't worry, whatever you have available will work. So our reading for today comes from the Gospel of John. It is the first chapter, the first few verses of John. The Gospel of John does not tell us a Christmas story in the traditional sense. It is not about shepherds and angels, and it's not about a baby being born in a manger or in a small peasant house in Bethlehem. The story that John casts is about the beginning, is about a beginning where the Word, the Logos, is with God, even before history itself, at the beginning. And John casts this image for us as important for us to understand who it is that Christ is about, who it is that God is about, what is going on with our world, what is going on with the ministry that God gave to Christ, and how does all this fit together for John? For John, it is a big, big vision of one who is connected to the very cosmos itself. So let's hear this message, this word from Scripture, and then we'll reflect on it in our message. John chapter 1, beginning with verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him. And without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Here ends our reading. May God add understanding to these, God's holy words. Well, today is January 1st. The church, and every few years this cycle comes around. We have Christmas on a Sunday, and we have then New Year's on a Sunday. The same year they follow that way. So last Sunday was Christmas morning, and then this Sunday is New Year's. And of course, when New Year's comes around, it's always a good time to talk about beginnings, about this new year, and even to think about, why is January 1 the new year? Have you ever reflected on that? For centuries, the New Year's took place on the calendar at different times. It was not always January 1st. Sometimes we may think, it must have always been January 1st, right? No, it wasn't. Even as you settled more into this calendar that we use, of course, remember there's multiple calendars that different groups of people used, depending on the location and culture that they were, and still our Jewish brothers and sisters have their own calendar that they use, that they track, even while they accommodate and utilize what is the calendar that is given to us by, in essence, the Romans a long time ago. But even with this calendar that is roughly what we have now, it gets changed because there's problems with our calendar historically. Over time, there was problems where it wasn't tracking great. We could get off, because remember, every 4 years we have a leap year. We have that extra day because that gets us back in. Well, if you don't have that, if you didn't do that, if you weren't doing a few other things, the calendar gets off, so pretty soon you're kind of like, it's supposed to be spring, but it's really still winter and all that kind of stuff. So calendars have not been the exact same thing. Our calendar has not been. Years and years ago, you couldn't buy a calendar January to December and the way we have it all now here written, and now how we experience it. But be that as it may, we did have roughly a similar calendar. And even then, the calendar, the beginning of a new year was sometimes in March. Around like March, 25th or, around that time. If you think about it, March, you might think about when's the new year, what's that cycle for us, at least in the northern hemisphere? Well, what makes sense? Well, springtime, right? Spring might make sense. That's the new season, the season of growth, the season of beginnings. And so March was the season. Well, and as Christian influence was here, even in the early years of Christendom, throughout the West, some folks started the New Year on December 25th, which is, of course, the solstice, but also becomes the agreed upon thing with the birth of Jesus. And sometimes we talk about that in our liturgical calendar. Those of you who pay attention to me, and I say, oh, our New Year in the liturgical calendar begins in the season of really of Advent, of the beginning, but it could be looked at as Christmas too. So, beginning has not always been the exact same thing in terms of years, right? We haven't always had the same beginning. And time is this interesting thing that we've gotten more caught up in, and both beginnings of starting a new year, but then how we locate and keep track of time is very important. We'll say something more about that a little bit. But for John, in his gospel, John isn't concerned about the date of Jesus' birth. He isn't even about the place of Jesus' birth. Because for John, he wants us to know that in the beginning, as he says, was the Word. The word, the Logos, for John is actually Christ. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This Logos, that Christ himself is a part of God. And why is that important for us all these years later? Well, John's sensibilities that we at least should hear are that what Christ is about, what Christ was born into and became about, and even his death and crucifixion, all that stuff that we talk about that's kind of timed in history and takes place in history, is actually rooted not just in those moments, but is rooted in that Jesus has always been about this, that the Christ, Jesus the Christ, has always been this living reality, this, as he says, this word that was with God, this Logos, this wisdom that was with God. And the wisdom is not the wisdom that the world sometimes says. Sometimes it overlaps. Wisdom that, when you talk about wisdom of the world and wisdom of God, those overlap. But the wisdom that God in Christ emanates is this wisdom of a way of love, a way of commitment to and with what God is about, which is this transforming power of grace and mercy and compassion. All this kind of stuff that sometimes some people say, oh, that's the foolishness of the world. Christians have said, no, what looks to be foolish is actually the deep wisdom of God. And what Christ is and what Christ has been is what we're talking about from the very beginning. So this doesn't just show up when Jesus is born. It's been there. At the very beginning, it was with God. And Christ was with God, as John would say. And that kind of cuts against this idea of time, because time, sometimes we think we measure human life, we measure sometimes value, both in and beyond human values. How we value human beings or how we value everything is sometimes assessed through time, right? Most of us, if we work and are engaged with the world, there's ways in which, you've got to function within time, and what are you doing, and how are you using your time, and are you using your time wisely, right? We have all this stuff nowadays. We talk about time management, and are you managing your time and using it well? And it's important. Time is there, but John reminds us that what Jesus is about is beyond time itself. It's timeless, and it's not valued in the same way as we measure it. Now, the Greeks talk about chronos, which is the measuring of time, as we would talk about measuring, hours and days and weeks, chronos time. And then you have kairos moments, kairos time, which is time that has different kinds of value. And, it's full of meaning and other things, and it's not necessarily just the measurement of time. But sometimes we kind of blur those together as human beings these days, and even the Greeks blurred them together in some ways. And time, actually can really cause us great challenges when we lose track of the fact that we need to start at the beginning with God, that what God is about. God has always been about. John wants us to remember that in the beginning, God's always about this. So when we come to the new year, sometimes we kind of say, oh, it's a new year, we're starting anew. Well, in some ways we are. There's a great chance to say, hey, it's a new year and I'm going to start doing something else. I'm going to eat better, or I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to do whatever I'm supposed to do. I'm going to kick off the new year. We have what we call the New Year's resolutions, and we have all that stuff. And those can be helpful to us, but John would tell us that, when we start and think we're starting anew, when we think something new is here, and it really is actually in what God is about, has always been about. That Christ himself was about these things. Christ was with God at the beginning. And in fact, as he says, his life was the light of all people. What was this light? Well, this light was this expression of this connection to God, and this expression of what God is about, and is so imbued with Jesus that it doesn't begin when he's born, it doesn't end when he's died, because of course we know he's resurrected, and thus this whole aspects of Christ that is moving in and through us and in through the world is beyond history itself, and thus the beginning is more than just starting anew. So when we start this new year, maybe we should think about that. Think about what is time to us, and what is it that God is about in our lives, and how can we be more connected to that? Because, the French composer Hector Berlioz once remarked, time is a great teacher. Time is a great teacher. Then he goes on, though, he says, unfortunately, it kills all of its pupils. Right? Time teaches us much, right? Most of us would say, well, I've learned a lot over my life. I gained knowledge. But of course, as we've gotten older and as our life comes, then we also learn that, well, we don't have unlimited time, right? Time kills all of its pupils. And so if we're waiting to learn from time, that may not be enough. And for John, he's saying, look to this one, the Word, the Logos, the wisdom. He was at the beginning. He's in and through all things. He'll be beyond the end. And it's a lesson that that I think is interesting as we've gotten further and further away from the story of Christ and the birth of Christ, the message of Christ 2,000 years ago, right? We have gotten more and more invested in thinking that we control time. In his book, Time Wars, Jeremy Rifkin writes that the idea of our lives and events in them being controlled by blocks of allocated time, in terms of centuries at least, is a relatively new idea. You think about that? The idea really comes, out of, Rifkin says, out of the Benedictine movement, where the Benedictines themselves were looking around the world, and Benedict, he saw how idleness is an enemy of soul, so that one of the Benedictine things is like, you've got to use our time. So the Benedictines, what did the Benedictine monks do? Every minute of the day was filled with things to do so that they wouldn't be idle. You have prayer, and worship, and you prepare meals, and you do work, and you do more prayers, and you have a whole set of things that keep you occupied and not idle, so that you're not lost to time itself. And Rifkin notes that a lot of interesting things happened over the last number of centuries. These things that maybe we don't ponder now, but it's interesting to me, especially as more and more people talk about being stressed and not having enough time, and I'm busy and all that kind of stuff, and I'll talk about that sometimes. Rifkin points out that it was in the 15th century that clocks began to rival churches in the square. That you start having clocks show up to keep time, right? Even churches put clocks in steeples, right? And then in the 17th century, those clocks begin to have minute hands, right? The clocks early on have hours, right? You don't keep track of the minutes. You have the time to keep track of. Remember the bells that would toll on the hour, so you know what hour it is. But then in the 17th century, you start having minutes. You're tracking minutes. And then, of course, if you think about it now, what do? I mean, most of us, we've got, clocks on our phones, and we have alarms, and we have all kinds of stuff, right? And we can look at time, and we can track it to the very second. Milliseconds, right? Some of us have clocks and other things that are connected to and send signals back and forth so that they can be precise with the atomic clock, right? So that we know the precise time. We are not going to be thrown off even by a little bit of that time. Think about that. And in some ways, we have this grand irony that's taking place, right? Where human beings have more and more of this belief that somehow we can track and thus we can control time. Because there is an essence to that. The more and more we're tracking time, the more we seem to believe that we are then in control of time. And yet, the question becomes, or is time in control of us? And especially if we lose track, as John the writer reminds us, of what are the most important things that should be animating from us, because they first animated from God. The beginning, the Word was with God, and the Word was God in the beginning, and He comes into being. He comes in here to be a part of that timelessness, that timeless nature of love, of grace, compassion, of mercy. These are things that are timeless. That sometimes people say, well, maybe when I get older, I'll do more good stuff for people. When I have time. When we're rushing down the street and we see somebody in need, we go, I'd like to help them, but I don't have time, right? And that is the struggle all of us have, isn't it? That sometimes we're controlled by time, that we lose track of the very things that we say are most ultimately important to who we are. And we lose track of living in the present moment because we're so caught up about what I need to get done, what's happened, and what did I lose time, and yesterday was there, and all this stuff happened. Some people, we live with regrets of what happened yesterday, and some of us are so focused on the future that we lose track of what's going on right now and here. In fact, there's this great story that spiritual leader Joan Chitlister tells. She says there's a disciple who comes to a wise one and says, "Where shall I look for enlightenment?" "Here," says the wise one. "And when will it happen?" the disciple asked. "It is happening right now," said the wise one. "Then why don't I experience?" "Because you don't look." "What should I look for?" "Nothing. Just look." "Look at what?" "At anything your eyes light on." "But must I look in a special way?" "No, the ordinary way will do." "But don't I always look the ordinary way?" "No, you don't." "But why ever not?" "Because to look you must be here, and you are mostly somewhere else." This is the great challenge for us. Christ, who comes into the world and is with us every moment of our lives, is here right now in this moment. That Christ is ready for us to recognize Christ and to be a part of who Christ has been since the beginning. But we're usually somewhere else. I'm usually somewhere else. Let's try as I way. And thus, on this day, we have this opportunity for communion together. And really, communion is the gift of here. It is the gift of the one who was with God in the beginning and has been with us in all the times. And all the communion is a pausing for us to realize that Christ is present to us in the breaking of bread and the sharing of cup. And so when Jesus took bread, he broke it and he gave it to his disciples. He said, "This is my body which is given for you. As often as you do this, do it in remembrance of me." Do it and recognize the presence of Christ in our lives. Ministering in Christ's name, I give you that bread. And then after supper, Jesus took the cup, and after giving thanks, he said, "This is the cup of a new covenant shed in my blood. As often as you drink it in remembrance of me." Ministering in Christ's name, let us share this cup together. So my friends, we have shared the presence of Christ. That is what communion is. It is sharing the presence of Christ. The one who was at the very beginning, the one who is beyond time itself, the one who is always here with us, always present. If only we can center ourselves and let go of the time that so often is in control of our lives. And allow God to surround us and be in and moving in and through us. And so in that spirit, I'm going to send us forth on this day, saying to you, go forth into this day and this new year, as children of God. Carry with you all that Christ brings and all that Christ promises for the world. And may Christ's life be held within our own. May God's creativity enlarge all that we are. And may the Spirit lift our hearts in joy. In this moment and in every moment. Amen.